My husband, Michael, had only one rule in our house: never open the basement door. It wasn't locked with chains or heavy bolts, just an old brass keyhole and a wooden sign that read, "Keep out." For years, I obeyed him without question. Michael wasn't a cruel man. In fact, he was the gentlest soul I'd ever known, patient, caring, and the kind of man who could make you feel safe just by standing beside you. We met when I was 26 at a small-town bookstore in Maine. I remember his smile that day. Quiet, almost shy, the kind that hides more than it shows. After we married, he built our dream house on the edge of a pine forest. Everything about it was perfect. The creaking porch, the smell of cedar, the warmth that wrapped around us every night. Everything except that one door. At first, I thought it was just a storage room. But then strange things started happening. Sometimes at night, I'd hear faint scratching sounds coming from behind it, like nails brushing against wood. Other times, a soft humming, like someone singing through the walls. When I told Michael, he would hold me close and whisper, "Emma, please, don't ever go near that door. Promise me." I'd ask why, but he'd just shake his head. "It's for your own good," he'd say, his eyes darker than usual. Years passed. I learned to live with it, with the sound, the mystery, and the rule. But the older we got, the more that door seemed to haunt our marriage. Every time I passed it, I felt something watching from the other side. Then, one winter night, Michael collapsed in the kitchen. A heart attack. He was gone before the ambulance even arrived. The house felt emptier than ever. The silence was thick, the kind that eats through your soul. I wandered from room to room for days, unable to sleep, unable to cry. And then, 3 nights after the funeral, I heard it again, the humming, but this time it was clearer, softer, like a woman's voice singing an old lullaby. I froze outside the door. The air felt cold, unnaturally cold, like the forest wind had seeped inside. My heart raced. For a moment, I thought maybe I was losing my mind from grief. But then, I heard it. A whisper. "Emma!" It came from behind the door. I stumbled back, my hands trembling. It couldn't be real. There was no one else in the house. I ran upstairs and hid under the covers like a child, clutching Michael's old sweater to my chest. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something strange. The door, the one that had always been locked, was slightly open, just an inch. But enough for me to see darkness beyond it. I felt the air shift, a heavy stillness that made my skin crawl. I could almost hear Michael's voice in my head. "Never open that door," but something in me needed to know. I had to understand what he'd been hiding all these years. So that night, when the world outside went quiet and the snow began to fall, I stood before that door with a flashlight in one hand and Michael's old key in the other. I hesitated. My hand shook as I slid the key into the lock. The metal was icy cold. I whispered to myself, "It's just a room." Then I turned the key. The door creaked open with a low moan, and the smell hit me first. Something damp and metallic like rust and old earth. My flashlight flickered, revealing narrow stairs leading down into the dark. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The wooden floor groaned beneath me as I descended. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom I saw a small room. There were shelves lined with old jars, and in the corner, something covered with a white sheet. I slowly approached it. My fingers brushed against the fabric, and then I pulled it off. Underneath was a mirror. But not just any mirror. It was tall, framed in dark iron, and the glass shimmered faintly like it was breathing. As I looked closer, I realized my reflection wasn't moving. I blinked. The woman in the mirror didn't. And then she smiled. Not me, her. My flashlight flickered again, and I stepped back, heart pounding. The humming returned, louder this time, echoing all around the basement. That's when I noticed something written along the edge of the mirror frame. Words carved deep into the metal. To keep her in, never open the door. I stumbled back toward the stairs, but before I could move, a voice whispered behind me, soft, familiar, loving. "Emma." "Why did you open it?" The moment that whisper reached my ears, Every muscle in my body froze. It was Michael's voice. I turned sharply, my flashlight beam slicing through the shadows. The basement was empty. The shelves stood still. The air was heavy with dust. And yet, the smell of Michael's aftershave drifted past me like he had just walked by. "Michael?" I whispered. "Is that you?" No answer, just a faint creak like a footstep on the old wood behind me. My heart slammed against my ribs. The mirror stood there, its surface trembling like water. And then, slowly, shapes began to form inside it. Not reflections, but memories. I saw flashes. Our wedding day, our first Christmas. Him holding my hand at the hospital after my miscarriage. Every moment of our life together, flickering inside the glass. Tears filled my eyes. "Michael, what is this?" The humming returned, the same lullaby, but now I recognized it. It was the song my mother used to sing to me as a child. How could Michael have known that? I stepped closer, my breath fogging up the glass. And that's when I saw her again, the woman in the mirror. This time she looked exactly like me. Same hair, same eyes, same trembling lips, but her expression was wrong. She was smiling too wide, too human to be human. And then she spoke, her voice soft, echoing through the basement like wind in a tunnel. "You shouldn't have come here, Emma. He kept you safe." I stumbled back, shaking my head. "Who are you?" Her smile faltered. "You know who I am." I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It felt like the ground was holding me still. The air turned cold, painfully cold. My flashlight dimmed again until only the faint light from the mirror illuminated the room. Then she reached out, or rather, her hand pressed against the inside of the glass. The surface rippled like liquid where her fingers touched. And when I looked down, I saw the faint outline of a handprint forming on my side of the mirror. That's when I screamed. The sound echoed through the basement, bouncing off the walls. I turned and bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me so hard that the frame cracked. I collapsed against it, breathing hard, trying to convince myself that it was just grief. Just my mind breaking under the weight of losing Michael. But deep down, I knew something inside that mirror was real. That night, I dreamed of the forest. I was walking barefoot among the pines. The ground was wet, the sky gray. Somewhere ahead, I saw Michael standing in the mist, his back to me. "Michael," I called. He didn't move. I ran closer, but when I touched his shoulder, he turned, and his face wasn't his anymore. It was hers, the woman from the mirror. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, the house echoing with silence. When I went downstairs the next morning, I found muddy footprints on the hallway floor, small, bare, leading straight from the basement door to the kitchen. I hadn't gone down there since last night. I followed them with my heart in my throat. They stopped right in front of the counter, where Michael's favorite mug sat, filled with fresh coffee. Steam still rising. My hands trembled so hard I almost dropped it. I hadn't brewed coffee that morning. "Michael?" I whispered again. But this time, my voice broke. I began searching the house like a madwoman. Every room, every closet, even the attic. Nothing. Then, in our bedroom, I found something that made my blood run cold. The mirror, the one that used to hang above our dresser, was cracked. But not just cracked, something had been drawn across it with Michael's handwriting. "She's free." The words were smeared, as if written in haste, or with shaking hands. I backed away, tears burning my eyes. The truth began forming in my head like a storm cloud. Whatever Michael had locked behind that door, it wasn't meant to protect the house from the outside world. It was meant to protect the world from what was inside. And now, she was loose. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with every light on, clutching the old Bible that used to belong to my grandmother. Every now and then, I'd hear creaks from the hallway. Once, I could have sworn someone whispered my name again. When dawn came, I finally mustered the courage to go back down to the basement. The door was wide open this time. Inside, the mirror stood still, but its surface was no longer glass. It looked like smoke, swirling and shifting, as if a storm lived within it. And in that smoke, I saw something that made my knees buckle. My husband's face. But he wasn't smiling. He looked terrified. His lips moved, forming one word, over and over. Run. I stood there frozen at the top of the basement stairs, staring at the swirling glass below. Michael's face had already faded, swallowed by the smoke-like fog within the mirror. But the last thing he mouthed before vanishing burned into my brain. Run. I slammed the door shut and locked it, even shoved a heavy dresser in front of it. Then I sank to the floor, shaking, whispering to myself like a prayer. It's not real. It's not real. But deep down I knew it was. The next few days passed in a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. The house creaked and moaned constantly, as if something alive had settled inside the walls. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my periphery. A flash of white near the hallway mirror, a figure behind me that disappeared when I turned around. By the third night, I started covering the mirrors with sheets, all of them. Every time I caught my own reflection, I saw her standing slightly behind me, her head tilted, her smile crooked, her eyes far too dark. I called Father Reynolds, the priest from the local parish. He'd been at Michael's funeral and offered help if I ever needed it. When I told him everything, he didn't laugh. He just listened quietly and then asked, "Emma, did Michael ever mention anything about his family before you married him?" I frowned. No, he never spoke of them. He said they were gone. The priest sighed, rubbing the edge of his rosary. Then maybe you should look into his records. I'll come by tomorrow to bless the house. That night, I sat on the couch with an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. Most pictures were of us, vacations, birthdays, quiet nights by the fire. But near the end of the album, there was a single photograph I didn't remember putting there. It was old, maybe from the 1950s. A man who looked almost exactly like Michael stood beside a woman in front of a church. But there was something wrong with her face. The photo had faded and her features were blurred, except for her eyes. They were pitch black. On the back, in Michael's handwriting, were the words, "She came back." My blood ran cold. I threw the album aside and grabbed my phone to call Father Reynolds. But before I could dial, the power went out. The entire house went dark. Then, click, the sound of the basement door unlocking itself. I froze. Slowly, I turned toward the hallway. The dresser I had shoved in front of the door was moving, inching forward like someone was pushing from the other side. "Stop!" I shouted, backing away. The dresser stopped. For a second, the silence was so thick I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Then I heard the voice, soft, like a whisper, right beside my ear. "Emma, don't be afraid. You opened it. You're one of us now," I screamed and ran to the kitchen, fumbling for a candle. The moment I lit it, every mirror in the house shattered at once. A sound like thunder rolled through the walls, followed by distant laughter, echoing female and horribly familiar. The candlelight flickered violently. I clutched the cross around my neck and whispered the Lord's Prayer. But my voice shook too much to finish. Then just as suddenly, the power came back, all the lights flickered on. And standing in front of me, barefoot on the kitchen floor, was Michael. Or at least, he looked like him. His clothes were torn, his face pale and sunken. His eyes darted to mine with desperate fear. "Emma, listen to me," he said, his voice cracking. "It's not me. Don't believe what you see." Before I could respond, the figure lunged forward and grabbed my wrist, and in that instant, I saw the truth. The hand holding me wasn't warm like his used to be. It was ice cold. The skin shifted under my touch, like it was made of smoke. Then, the thing smiled. Not lovingly, but mockingly, and whispered he tried to hide me, but he never could. The lights flickered again. When they steadied, he was gone. Only a smear of black ash remained on the floor where he'd stood. The next morning, Father Reynolds arrived. The moment he stepped inside, his expression changed. "The air in here. It's wrong," he muttered. He sprinkled holy water in each room, murmuring prayers. When he reached the basement door, the water hissed, actually hissed, as if it had touched a flame. He turned to me, pale. "What's down there?" "A mirror," I said. My voice was barely audible. "It showed me Michael. And something else." He took a step back, clutching his crucifix. "That's not a mirror. That's a gateway. Whatever he trapped inside it, he didn't get to finish. Because at that moment, the house began to shake. The pictures on the wall rattled. The lights flickered, and a low moan filled the air. A sound that seemed to come from deep beneath the floorboards. Father Reynolds shouted, "Get out now!" But I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring down the hallway where the basement door had swung open again on its own. And from the darkness below, a voice sang that same lullaby, the one from my childhood. The days after my husband's funeral drifted by in a strange, heavy fog. People came, they cried, they hugged me, and then they left. After the last car disappeared down the long gravel driveway, silence settled over the house like a thick blanket. It was the kind of silence that doesn't comfort. It presses down until you start to hear your own heartbeat echo. Every time I tried to sit still, my eyes wandered to that hallway, the one that ended at the forbidden door. He had warned me about it from the first day we moved in. Promise me, Emily, never open that door. No matter what you hear. And I had promised. At first, it seemed like a harmless superstition, one of his strange little quirks. He never explained why, and I never pushed him to. But after his death, that promise started to feel heavier. For 3 nights, I avoided that part of the house entirely. But grief is a strange thing. It doesn't just make you sad. It makes you curious. You start wanting answers to questions you never dared to ask. On the 4th day, while cleaning, the vacuum stopped abruptly with a harsh clunk. I bent down, annoyed, thinking it had eaten one of his cufflinks or a nail. Instead, I found something small and glinting between the floorboards. A brass key, tarnished and old, the kind you only see in antique stores. It was cold to the touch, but the second my fingers closed around it, a sharp chill ran up my spine, and before I could stop myself, I turned toward the door. The key was the perfect size. It slid into the lock as though it had been waiting for me. For a long moment, I stood frozen there, one hand on the key, the other pressed to my chest. It would be so easy to turn it, just one motion, but his voice filled my head again. Never open that door. My hand trembled. I yanked the key out and dropped it to the floor, my breath coming fast. The sound of the key hitting the wood echoed through the empty hall. That night, I couldn't sleep. At first, I thought it was the wind that woke me. But then I heard it again, a faint, rhythmic tapping from the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't random. It sounded deliberate, almost like a knock, but not on the door. More like from behind it. I pulled the blanket over my head like a child, praying it would stop. But the tapping grew louder, followed by something worse, a whisper. A dry, cracked whisper that curled through the dark. Emily. I sat up, heart racing. The voice was unmistakable. It was his voice. My husband's. I stumbled out of bed, whispering his name, convincing myself it was grief, that my mind was playing tricks. But when I reached the hallway, the sound stopped. The air felt colder there, unnaturally cold, like the middle of winter. And then I saw it. The key. It was lying right in front of the door again, even though I was sure I'd left it on the kitchen counter hours earlier. I backed away slowly, refusing to look at the handle. But just before I turned, I noticed something. The carvings on the door, twisted vines and unfamiliar symbols, were not the same as before. They had shifted. They looked fresher, almost as if the wood itself had moved during the night. The next morning, I decided to leave the house. I drove into town, had coffee I didn't taste, and bought flowers for his grave, anything to keep me away from that place. But when I returned that evening, I found the front door slightly open, just enough for the wind to move the curtain inside. And lying right in the middle of the entryway was the key again. I wanted to scream, to throw it into the woods and forget it existed. But something, curiosity or madness, kept me from doing it. Instead, I placed it on the nightstand beside my bed, determined to watch it all night. Around midnight, I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the key was gone. My heart pounded. I turned on the lamp, scanning the floor, and there it was. Back at the door again. This time, the whispers were louder. And underneath them, I could swear I heard footsteps, slow, dragging, from somewhere beneath the floorboards. By dawn, I made a decision. Whatever was behind that door had waited long enough. My husband's secrets had followed me into every dream, every waking moment. If I didn't face them, I would lose my mind, so I took the key, gripping it tight. My fingers were shaking, my breath uneven. The air around the door seemed to hum, like static before a storm. When I slid the key into the lock this time, it felt warm. And before I could turn it, a voice, soft and pleading, spoke from behind the wood. "Emily, please, don't," I froze. It sounded like him, but older, weaker, and filled with fear. The door rattled once. Then silence. I stepped back, my entire body trembling. Something in me knew that if I turned that key now, I would never be able to go back. But it was already too late, because when I looked down, the key had turned itself, and the lock clicked open. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined the sound, that the click had been a trick of the mind. But then the door creaked, moving an inch, just enough for a cold breath of air to spill out from the darkness beyond. The air smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to slam the door shut, lock it again, pretend none of this was real. But my hands wouldn't move. Instead, I pushed it open. The hinges moaned as if protesting, their echoes traveling down into whatever lay beyond. Inside, it wasn't a room, not exactly. It was a staircase, spiraling downward into pitch-black shadows. No light reached the bottom. For years, I'd believed that door led to a sealed storage room or old wine cellar. But my husband had always kept it locked. Now I knew why. "Hello?" My voice barely carried past the first few steps. It came back to me warped, distant, as if someone else were standing far below, repeating my words. I turned on the flashlight from my phone. The beam cut through the dark, revealing stone walls lined with rotting wood. Dust floated like ash in the air. The further I went, the colder it became. Every step groaned under my weight. And then, about halfway down, I noticed something strange. Scratches on the wall. Dozens of them. Some deep, as though made by fingernails. Others looked carved, deliberate, words, names maybe, though most were too faded to read. When I bent closer, one line caught my eye. I told her not to open it. My stomach tightened. Was this some sick joke? Did he write that? The flashlight flickered. For a split second, I thought I saw movement at the bottom of the stairs. A shadow that didn't belong to me. When I finally reached the floor, I found myself standing in a long underground corridor. It looked like part of an old foundation, stone bricks, moss crawling over the walls, and puddles reflecting the light in dull silver. There were doors here, too. Not one, but 3 of them, each made of the same dark wood, each carved with symbols, similar to the ones on the door upstairs. The middle door stood slightly open, the edges marked by dark stains. I hesitated only a moment before I pushed it wider. Inside was a small room, empty except for a wooden chair in the center. And on that chair sat something that made my skin crawl. A recording device, an old reel-to-reel recorder, the kind from decades ago. My hands shook as I pressed the power button. The reels began to spin, and a voice crackled to life. His voice. My husband's. "If you're hearing this, Emily, I failed. I thought I could keep it sealed. I thought I could protect you. But the house, the door, it's older than either of us. Don't go any further. Please, for the love of God, don't." Then, silence. Followed by another voice, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't his. It wasn't human. She's already here. The machine clicked off on its own. The walls suddenly groaned, and the lights on my phone dimmed. The air grew heavy, thick, almost hard to breathe. And then, footsteps. Behind me, I turned fast, the flashlight shaking in my grip. But the staircase was empty, yet the footsteps continued, slow, steady, echoing against the stone. Coming closer. I backed into the room, pressing myself against the wall. The beam of light swung wildly across the floor and landed on something carved near my feet. A symbol, the same one etched on my husband's wedding ring. I never understood its meaning before. Now it pulsed faintly, glowing a dull red as if alive. I dropped the phone. The light went out. Darkness swallowed me. Somewhere in that pitch-black void, something moved. I could hear it breathing, wet, ragged, and wrong. A low whisper slid through the dark, brushing against my ear. He kept me here. For you! I screamed, fumbling for the stairs, but my hands found only cold stone. The air seemed to press against me, heavy and suffocating. Something brushed my shoulder, cold, soft, almost human. And then a sound, a heartbeat, slow and deep, coming from the walls themselves. The ground shuddered. The smell of iron grew stronger, and for one terrifying moment I saw a faint shape form in the darkness, tall, thin, and draped in something that moved like smoke. It didn't walk. It slid, straight toward me. I scrambled up the stairs, half crawling, half running, my lungs burning. Behind me, the whispers rose into a shriek. Hundreds of voices, crying out the same words again and again. Don't leave me here. You opened it. You opened it. When I burst through the door into the hallway, the lights upstairs exploded, bulbs bursting one after another in a chain of cracks. I slammed the door shut and twisted the lock. Silence. I fell to the floor, gasping, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the key again. It rolled across the floorboards, stopping just before the door, and then, from behind it, came a single knock. Soft, deliberate, like a reminder that whatever I had just seen wasn't finished with me yet. I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, unable to move, my eyes fixed on that door. The house was silent now, too silent. Even the usual hum of the refrigerator had stopped, and the air felt thick, almost humming with tension. The knock didn't come again, but I could still feel something behind it, watching, waiting. Finally, I forced myself up, leaning against the wall for balance. My legs trembled, and the cold sweat on my skin made my clothes cling. I looked at the door handle, still locked. The key lay near it, glinting faintly in the dim light. I wanted to throw it out, to burn it. But something deep inside whispered, don't. That same whisper that had made me open the door in the first place. I went to the kitchen, made tea with shaking hands, and sat at the table. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:07 a.m. I hadn't realized how late or how early it was. The moment I took a sip, a faint sound came from the walls, like a sigh, then a whisper. At first, I thought it was wind seeping through the cracks, but when the voice spoke my name, Emily, I dropped the cup, porcelain shattering across the floor. The sound came again, closer this time. A whisper stretching, distorted, Emily, you let it out. I stumbled backward, heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. No, I whispered back, shaking my head. You're not real. You're not. He thought he could hide me. The voice came from behind the wall, from the direction of the doorway to the basement. Each word scraped like nails across wood. He built this house around me. My breath caught, pieces began to connect. The strange symbols, the carvings, my husband's obsession with sealing that door. This wasn't just some old curse or superstition. He had trapped something here, and now I had set it free. The lights flickered again. The temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath came out in white mist. I could hear the walls creaking, expanding and contracting like lungs. Then, a faint scratching sound, like someone tracing their fingers along the plaster from the inside. The sound moved slowly, following me as I backed away. I ran upstairs to the bedroom and slammed the door. The house groaned again, wood snapping somewhere in the distance. I crawled into bed, clutching the blanket like a child. For the first time in years, I prayed. Not to any God I believed in, but to something, anything that could undo what I'd done. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because when I opened my eyes, the sunlight was creeping through the curtains. Birds were chirping outside, the normal morning sounds filling the air. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw the dirt on my hands, the bruise on my arm, and the faint sound of whispering still there, underneath everything. It hadn't stopped. That day, I avoided the basement. I threw myself into cleaning, cooking, anything that kept me busy. But the voices didn't leave, they changed. Sometimes they sounded like my husband, calling my name, asking for help. Sometimes they were unfamiliar, murmuring words I couldn't understand. And then, around sunset, I saw something that made my blood freeze. In the hallway mirror, behind my reflection, the door stood wide open again. I turned around, and it was closed. I looked back at the mirror, open. Something dark was standing just inside the doorway in the reflection. Tall, still. It moved when I didn't. That night, I called Dr. Weaver, my husband's old colleague, a historian who had once helped him with the symbols carved around the house. He answered groggily but alert when I told him who I was. "Emily? My God, it's been years. How are you?" "Not well," I admitted. My voice cracked. "It's about the door, the one he told me never to open." There was silence on the other end. Then a low sigh. "He told me he sealed it. You didn't open it, did you?" I couldn't answer. That was enough. Dr. Weaver exhaled heavily. "Listen to me. If it's open, you need to leave that house. Tonight. Do you hear me? What's behind it?" I demanded. "What did he do down there?" But the line crackled. His voice broke up, distorted. He tried to contain. "She's not." Then static swallowed the rest. When I pulled the phone from my ear, the call had ended. I tried calling back. No signal. That's when the smell returned. Iron, mold, something else, like burnt hair. I turned toward the hallway and froze. The door was open again. Not the basement door, but the front door of the house. A trail of dark, wet footprints led from it toward the basement. Each print shimmered faintly, steaming in the cool air. My heart thundered as I followed them, slow, cautious steps. They went all the way down the hallway and stopped in front of the locked door, except now, the lock was gone, just an empty hole where the key used to fit. The air around me vibrated, a low hum like a heartbeat buried in the walls. I took a step back. The floorboards creaked. "Emily..." The whisper came again, but this time from behind me. I spun around, expecting to see nothing. But there, standing at the end of the hall, was a figure. It wore my husband's clothes. Same height, same posture, but his face, it wasn't him. The skin was pale, stretched too tight. The eyes were black hollows that shimmered faintly like wet glass. And when it smiled, it was all wrong. "You shouldn't have opened it, darling." I stumbled backward, my shoulder hitting the wall. My knees went weak. The thing tilted its head, watching me with a kind of sad amusement. "He tried to save you. But now, it's your turn." It took a step forward, and the lights in the hallway went out one by one. The hum became a roar, the walls themselves vibrating. I screamed and ran into the kitchen, fumbling for the drawer where I kept the matches. When I struck one, the flame flickered weakly, barely illuminating the counter. The figure was gone, but the voice wasn't. "You can't burn what isn't alive." The flame went out. Darkness again. And then laughter. Soft, low, but filled with something that didn't belong in this world. Morning sunlight slid across the kitchen floor, washing away the shadows that had haunted Emily all night. She hadn't slept. The unanswered question about the door pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat she couldn't quiet. She made coffee but didn't drink it. The air felt heavy, as if the house itself were holding its breath. For years she had believed her husband, David, was just a quiet engineer who loved his work more than conversation. But now every silence in the house felt planned, like he had built it to hide something. Emily walked toward his old study, a small room at the end of the hall filled with the faint scent of cedar and paper. The desk was exactly as he had left it, a stack of notebooks, a magnifying glass, and a broken pocket watch that had stopped the week before his death. She sat down and began to open drawers one by one. Receipts, letters, blueprints, until her hand brushed something rough against the bottom panel. She tugged, and a thin false board popped free, revealing a narrow leather-bound journal tied with a cord. The first page was written in David's familiar, careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I failed to stop it myself. Forgive me, Emily. Everything I built was for you." Her stomach tightened. He had written about Project Echo, a private experiment he had been running years ago at the acoustics lab. The entries described how he was researching sound frequencies that could calm people suffering from grief or trauma. The goal was to create a tone that comforted the human mind, a frequency that could carry memory without pain. But as she read on, the notes changed tone. Test 23. The recordings no longer behave predictably. The system replays voices that aren't mine. The signal seems to pick up emotional imprints, not sound, emotion itself. Emily paused, shivering, though the air was warm. The voices she had heard at night, whispering through the door, repeating her name. Could they be distorted recordings, fragments of emotion trapped in the walls? David's last entry read, "The final prototype is sealed behind the basement door. It's still transmitting. I can't destroy it yet. If I do, the data is lost forever. But if I leave it running, it might keep listening." She closed the journal slowly. So the door wasn't a supernatural curse. It was the entrance to the lab where her husband's final experiment still hummed in the dark. For a long time, she just sat there, feeling both betrayed and strangely proud. David hadn't gone mad. He had pushed science into something too human to measure, a machine that could remember sorrow. That evening, as the sky turned violet, she went to the basement door again. The metal locks were cold against her hand. The noise from behind the door was faint now, not whispering, but almost like breathing. Emily took a deep breath and spoke softly. "David, I know now. I'm not afraid." Then she turned away. Instead of opening the door, she went back to the study, powered on his old computer, and searched for the folder marked Echo. It was password protected, but she tried the only word that made sense. Forever. It opened. Inside were dozens of audio files, graphs, and a single video message. She clicked it. David appeared on the screen, sitting exactly where she was now, his face drawn but calm. "Emily, if you ever find this, promise me one thing. Don't destroy the system in anger. The voices aren't ghosts. They're echoes of us. The house only repeats what it hears. If you bring peace here, it will fade." His voice trembled slightly at the end. Tears slid down her cheeks. She finally understood. The sounds weren't haunting her. They were trying to finish a conversation that death had interrupted. That night she stayed in the study, listening to one of the recordings. A soft hum filled the air, then faint laughter, hers, from a dinner years ago. The device had captured their life together in sound waves. She smiled for the first time in weeks. At sunrise, she carried a small speaker to the hallway outside the sealed door and played one of David's old jazz records. The trumpet echoed through the house, bright and forgiving. For a moment, she thought she heard another instrument join in from behind the door, matching the melody perfectly. Then, silence. The hum stopped. The air felt lighter, freer. Emily pressed her hand against the door one last time. It was cool and still. She whispered, "Goodbye, David." Later that day, she called a contractor to remove the locks and the old machinery. When the man asked what was inside, she simply said, "Just a project that's finally finished." As the machines were carried away, sunlight poured into the basement for the first time in years. Dust sparkled like stars. Emily realized she wasn't closing a door anymore. She was opening a future. That evening, she sat by the window with her coffee. The house no longer hummed. It breathed quietly, peacefully. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's radio played the same jazz tune. She closed her eyes and let the music carry her forward. Days passed. For the first time in months, Emily slept through the night. The air in the house no longer carried the weight of secrets. It felt alive again, gentle and forgiving. But peace has a strange way of making silence louder. One morning, as she sat near the window watering her plants, she noticed the old pocket watch David used to carry lying on the sill. She didn't remember putting it there. When she picked it up, it ticked faintly. That startled her, because it had stopped years ago. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, she saw something she'd never noticed before. Echo, Phase 2. Her pulse quickened. Had David planned another stage of the experiment? Something he never told her about? She turned the watch over in her hand and pressed the crown. The ticking stopped again, and suddenly her computer in the study flickered on by itself. The blue login screen glowed faintly in the dim room. Emily approached cautiously. The mouse moved, by itself, and opened the same folder she had accessed before. Echo, a new file appeared. Timestamp, today, 7:42 a.m. File name, Phasey, message. Her breath caught. She clicked. The screen filled with static, Then David's voice came through, distant but clear. Emily. If you're hearing this, the system completed its loop. That means you set it free. Her hand covered her mouth. The experiment wasn't just about recording sound, it was about emotional resonance. Every memory we leave behind vibrates through time. You've proven that love, when understood, doesn't vanish. It stabilizes. He paused. The static softened into a low, rhythmic hum. The house doesn't need to remember pain anymore, Emily. Now, it remembers peace. That's what I wanted. That's what I built for you. The screen faded to black, and the hum transformed. Not into whispers this time, but into a melody. The same jazz tune they both loved, tears welled in her eyes. You did it, David, she whispered. You really did. She closed the laptop gently, feeling warmth spread through her chest. The kind of warmth that comes when grief finally turns into gratitude. That evening, she walked outside to the backyard for the first time since the funeral. The garden had grown wild. Vines climbed the fence, and flowers she didn't remember planting bloomed in clusters of white and gold. She sat down on the old wooden bench, holding the pocket watch. When she opened it again, it didn't tick, but inside the glass, faint light pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Then it stopped, and that was enough. Weeks later, Emily put the house up for sale. When the realtor came to photograph the place, he stopped in the hallway and said, "You can almost feel peace here." Like the walls are exhaling, Emily smiled. "Yes," she said softly. "It listens." After she moved into her new apartment across town, she decided to donate David's journals and research files to the university's acoustic lab. A few months later, she received an email from one of the professors. "Mrs. Turner, the technology your husband left behind could revolutionize how we understand emotional frequencies. The prototype he built appears to stabilize harmonic memory, essentially turning emotions into sound patterns. We're calling it the Turner resonance." She reread that message 3 times, smiling through her tears. David's work, their pain, had turned into something that could help others heal. That night, as she unpacked boxes in her quiet apartment, she turned on a small radio. The first song that played was jazz. Her laughter filled the room. Outside, the city lights shimmered. For the first time since his passing, she didn't feel alone. She felt connected to him, to everything they'd built, and to every note of music still echoing somewhere out there in the world. As she closed her eyes, she whispered one last time, "I never opened that door. David, I opened us, and if you listen carefully, between the notes, you can still hear a voice, calm, loving, and proud, whispering forever.